where we're at. It's pretty well clear to me where the country's going under Obamacare and Bernie-care. It's going into further bankruptcy. It's more decisions further away from where you live. And in 1996, we block granted money for welfare reform, and it worked like a charm. We put governors in charge of the program. We held them accountable. So here's the choice for America: socialism or federalism.
Very simple choice. That was Senator Lindsey Graham defending the health care bill he's working on with Senator Bill Cassidy. The very latest effort to repeal Obamacare comes as the Republican Party scrambles to get its agenda done by the end of the year. Joining us right now is Kentucky Republican Congressman Andy Barr here on set. Also with us is Rhode Island Democratic Congressman David Cicilline. Good to see you both. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good to be here.
So what's your take on Lindsey Graham and Senator Cassidy's plan?
Well, I think it's a great thing that the Senate is still working before the September 30th deadline to send something back to the House. Of course, we took action in the House to address the increasing premiums, to deal with the skyrocketing costs associated with Obamacare and the declining choices. And these problems are not going away. And so I'm very optimistic that the American people will continue to put pressure on the Senate to deliver on our promise to repeal and replace Obamacare.
Congressman Cicilline, are you gonna agree to Lindsey Graham's plan?
No, I mean, sadly, the Republican proposal doesn't address any of the problems in the Affordable Care Act. This provides a huge tax cut to the richest Americans, makes deep cuts in Medicaid, doesn't require states to cover pre-existing conditions. This is, again, an ongoing effort to pay for a huge tax cut for people in this country who don't need it.
Well, wait
and
a second. Does it not cover pre-existing conditions, or does it put it on the state?
It does not require pre-existing conditions, and a report released yesterday that said that for some very serious conditions, people will face tens of thousands of dollars in additional premiums. So it doesn't require that pre-existing conditions be covered. It's a huge tax cut for the richest people in this country who don't need it, makes deep cuts to Medicaid, which cover nursing home care, individuals with disabilities and the like. This is more of a trade-off. Let's finance a big, huge tax cut for the richest people in this country who don't need it in order to pay for that tax cut.
How is it a tax cut for the rich?
It's an $800 billion tax cut. And it's for people who don't need it. And to finance that tax cut, which is really driving this, they make deep cuts in health care to the rest of the American people. It's a terrible bill. We have to fight hard to defeat it. And it doesn't address any of the problems in the Affordable Care Act. We need to increase competition, drive down costs. There are things we can do. Make prescription drugs more affordable by letting the government negotiate discount prices.
How come you haven't done it yet? We've been hearing this for a long time. No competition. There's one insurance company in so many states.
We put in these proposals. We're not in the majority. We have a lot of good ideas of ways we can drive down costs, increase competition, make prescription drugs more affordable.
Congressman Barr, you're going to jump in here.
Bring those forward.
Obamacare is the problem. Obamacare is the law that's denying the American people choices and competition. Obamacare is the law that's driving up cost. And so, I respect
the millions of people who have health care now.
I respect my colleague, but the bottom line is I trust the state of Kentucky. I trust our governors. I trust our states. I trust federalism. And so I would just say, look, let's put power back in the hands of our leadership in the state governments who are closer to the people, who know the particular needs of their unique and vulnerable populations. I trust them to craft and customize Medicaid in a much better way than a one-size-fits-all bureaucrat government-run policy from Washington.
It's not a one-size-fits-all. And tell that to the millions and millions of Americans before the Affordable Care Act who didn't have insurance, who couldn't afford insurance,
who are now facing double-digit increases, in their premiums.
And we ought to be focused on bringing down costs, increasing competition, making prescription drugs more affordable. There are lots of things we can do working together in a bipartisan way to drive down the cost of health care. But repealing the Affordable Care Act fundamentally and providing it in order to finance a huge tax cut, making deep cuts in Medicaid and nursing home care for our seniors, for the most vulnerable population populations is not the right approach. It's why the American people spoke up
we got to
and
get to
defeated
tax reform. Andy Barr, where do we stand on tax reform?
Very optimistic. We know that from Chairman Brady, he's going to be releasing in paper this coming week when we get back to Washington next week, an actual outline, a blueprint in writing of basic principles of the legislation. We need to pass a budget resolution to set up reconciliation for tax reform, which is forthcoming. Chair Black of the Budget Committee has produced a good budget resolution. We need to pass that, and then the Ways and Means Committee will begin with the markup.
Congressman Cicilline, are you going to participate in any of this?
Of course we're going to participate, but what we want is there's going to be a tax reform. It needs to be a tax cut for working people, for the middle class. We don't need to see a tax proposal that has a big, huge tax cut for people at the very top, which has been the proposal the Republicans have put forth in the past.
No.
Well,
The American people, hardworking people, are sick and tired of paying more than their fair share.
Take the floor, Dagan.
Nearly half this country pays no net federal income tax, period.
Right, and
number one,
because
and let's
they
talk
don't
about
make enough money to pay an income tax.
Absolutely
We
not
ought to
true.
increase
It's because
the
that is
First of all,
absolutely not true.
may not pay.
And I want to point
they
something
may
out.
not pay
facts on the
federal income
program,
tax,
facts.
but they pay sales tax, they pay property tax, they pay Social Security
But
tax.
no
so this
income
notion they don't pay
tax.
taxes
But
is
no
not
income
true.
tax.
Let me-
What
If
do you want
they
to
don't
say?
make enough income, they don't pay
That
an
is
income
not
tax.
true.
And we ought to
It's
make sure
because it
tax
is too
reform
generous.
doesn't give a huge tax cut for the
Well, we're
people
gonna
at
hear
the
a lot
very
of this.
top.
I want to
who
say
have already
one. I want to
benefited
say
from this
one
economy.
thing to the people in this country. When you're paying sales tax, you are not paying 1 red cent to the people who are defending our freedoms, who are fighting overseas, leaving their families behind in this country. You are not funding the Defense Department. You are not funding and paying for the men and women in uniform when you're paying sales tax. So I push
we
back.
know what sales
I
tax
push back on
provides.
that.
We know
when-
what
when
income
you-
tax provides.
You're gonna
but
hear
we have a
this-
system that says you pay income tax when you reach a certain income. That's a
David,
fact.
you're going to hear this, by the way. You're going to expect to hear this kind of class warfare rhetoric throughout the fall when we begin to deliver fundamental comprehensive tax reform the first time in a generation.
Andy, with all
You're
due
going to hear
respect,
this tax
Andy,
cuts for
if
the
you
rich rhetoric. And here's,
Andy, if you believe,
David, hang on just
Andy,
a second.
because
Listen
Hold
to you.
on,
Hang just a
Cicilline.
second.
Hold on,
Just a
Cicilline.
second.
Go ahead, Barr.
But here's the truth. The truth is that when you hear this rhetoric, remember, the American people need to remember that the tax plan that we are proposing doubles the standard deduction. That means if you're an individual or family, 9 out of 10 families in America will be able to file their tax return on a simple postcard.
Well, the simplicity,
doubling the
that's...
standard
So let me
deduction rate for
simplicity.
working
But
Americans.
Congressman Cicilline, let
So
me
can
ask
I
you this
respond to that?
real quick on this. In terms of the corporate rate, would you support a corporate rate that goes down to, say, around 20%? Do you not believe lower taxes for companies will create an environment which will encourage them to hire and create new jobs? Do you not agree with that premise?
No, I don't believe with that premise. Look, I think we can make the tax code
What?
simpler. I think we can lower rates.
So,
but
in
I
other
don't
words,
believe
you
that
think
premise.
keeping corporate rates high is going to encourage them to create
I think we
jobs?
should be competitive. No, I think we should be competitive. I think there is no evidence that when you lower
We're not
taxes
competitive.
for
We're the
corporations,
least
you
How will we be
produce more
competitive?
jobs.
This is the least
Can I
competitive
finish?
tax
You
code
let-
in
Go
the
ahead.
world.
Go ahead. Finish. Let David Cicilline finish.
You didn't let Andy. When Andy talks about class warfare, let's be very clear. Democrats are going to fight for a simplified tax code that provides tax relief to working families, to hardworking middle-class people. People in this country are sick and tired of working twice, 2 times, 3 times as hard, 3 or 4 jobs just to make ends meet. To see the Republicans propose another tax cut for people at the very top.
So what would you think? What do you think is the very top? What do you think is the very top? David Cicilline, do you think $130,000 is? Do you think $130,000 is rich?
I don't think that's the very top. Obviously, I'm talking about people at the very top.
That's the last line of the top rate right now. $131,000.
My point is that if we're going to have tax reform, it should be focused on growing the middle class, giving relief to working people,
Yeah, but
not
what's your
worrying
number?
people at
What's
the very
rich?
top. And
What's
this
rich,
trickle
David?
down.
What's rich?
Look, I think it depends. I don't think it's this
$250,000?
trickle down
Pick a number.
economic theory.
What's rich? $200,000?
I think the reality
What should be
is
the highest
that we
rate?
need to
200,000?
focus.
What?
Look, I think we need to focus
Maria, can I
on
jump in?
Yeah.
tax relief for working people.
We understand
I don't think
that.
we need more advocates in Washington
I'm just
for
trying to
people
get
at the very
specific with
top.
you. What's working woman and man, and what's rich man and woman? What's your number?
Well, I think there.
What's your number, David? What's your number? What's rich?
I mean, if I were writing the tax code, I wouldn't provide tax relief for anyone making more than $250,000.
$250,000.
That's a school teacher and firefighter here in New York City. Right. So think about the cost of living.
That's a school teacher and a firefighter, David Cicilline. Now,
I'm talking about $250,000 I think what we want is working people to get tax relief.
Yeah.
We have too many
But
people
you're
in
not
Washington
telling
that
us
are waiting for
that's where the
that are
lines blur.
fighting-
You have to give us a number so people understand
my
and
point is,
have
let's
this
go in
resonate
with
with
a
folks.
set of,
If you want
let's
to
go in
deliver
with a
tax
set of
relief to working
principles,
people, you
Maria.
adopt the
Let's go in with a
proposed
set of
plan that we
principles
have,
that says
which
we're
doubles
not
the
going
standard deduction and